There's a photograph that shouldn't exist. It was taken in 1987, somewhere in rural Kentucky, on land that had belonged to the same family for over 200 years. In the image, you can see 3 generations of the Fields family standing around a freshly opened grave. Their faces tell you everything, not shock, not surprise, something far worse, recognition, as if they'd finally confirmed something they'd always suspected, but never dared to speak aloud. Within 18 months of that photograph being taken, 2 of the people in it would be dead. One by their own hand, another would disappear entirely, leaving behind only a handwritten note that read, "Some things should stay buried. We were warned." The third would spend the rest of their life trying to convince anyone who would listen that what they found wasn't just bones and decay. It was proof of something so disturbing that it had poisoned their bloodline for generations. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is what happens when a family decides to dig up the past, and the past refuses to let them walk away. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Fields family had lived in Harlan County, Kentucky, since before Kentucky was even a state. They were settlers, landowners, the kind of people whose names appeared in courthouse records going back to the late 1700s. But unlike most old Southern families, the Fields never spoke about their history, not at reunions, not at funerals, not even among themselves. When younger generations asked questions about their great-grandparents, they were met with silence or deflection. "That's old business," they'd say, "let the dead rest." But families like that always have stories, and silence, as it turns out, is just another way of keeping secrets alive. By the early 1980s, most of the original Fields homestead had been sold off or abandoned. What remained was a sagging farmhouse, a collapsing tobacco barn, and about 40 acres of dense, overgrown woods. The property had passed to Robert Fields, a quiet man in his mid-50s who worked as a machinist and had no intention of ever living there. He'd planned to sell it. That was until his mother, Doris, told him something on her deathbed in 1986. She made him promise not to sell the land, not yet. Not until he'd gone to the old family cemetery and set things right. When Robert asked what that meant, she grabbed his wrist hard enough to bruise and said, "You'll know when you see it." 3 weeks later, she was dead, and Robert Fields, against every instinct he had, went back to that property with a shovel. The family cemetery was barely visible anymore. It sat on a low hill about a quarter mile from the main house, surrounded by blackberry thickets and wild honeysuckle that had grown so thick you couldn't see the gravestones unless you were standing right on top of them. Robert brought his son, Michael, who was 23 at the time, and his uncle, Clayton, who was the oldest living Fields at 71. Clayton had been there before. He knew where the graves were. He also knew, though he wouldn't admit it until later, what they were looking for. The markers were simple. Fieldstones mostly, a few hand-carved slabs, names and dates worn down by 100 years of weather. But there was one grave that didn't match the others. It was set apart, closer to the tree line, and the stone was turned face down in the dirt. Deliberately, someone had flipped it, and judging by the way the ground had settled around it, it had been that way for a very long time. Clayton stared at it for a long time before he finally said, "That's the one." Robert asked him how he knew. Clayton didn't answer. He just picked up the shovel and started digging. They didn't dig deep. 3 feet down, maybe less, and the shovel hit wood. A coffin, rotted through in places, but still intact enough to see that it had been built small. Too small for an adult. Michael said later that his first thought was that it was a child's grave. That maybe some infant had died and been buried out here and forgotten. That would have made sense. That would have been sad, but normal. But when Robert pried the lid open and they saw what was inside, normal stopped being a word that that applied to their family anymore. It wasn't a child, it was a man, fully grown, but he'd been folded, his legs broken and tucked up against his chest, his arms snapped backward and tied behind him with what looked like old leather straps. His skull was crushed inward on one side, and there were iron nails driven through both of his hands, not ceremonially, not symbolically, driven in deep through the bone into the wood beneath him. This wasn't a burial. It was a binding. Someone had made absolutely sure that whatever this man was, he wasn't coming back up. Inside the coffin, tucked beneath the body, was a oilcloth bundle. It had survived better than the wood. When Robert unfolded it, he found papers, letters, a small leather journal, and a tintype photograph of a man standing in front of the very same farmhouse that still stood a quarter-mile away. The man in the photograph looked exactly like Robert. Same jawline, same deep, set eyes, same stern, unsmiling expression. Written on the back of the tintype in faded ink, Ezekiel Fields, 1858. May God have mercy on what he became. The journal was worse. It was written in several different hands, spanning multiple generations, but the entries told the same story over and over again. Ezekiel Fields had come back from the Civil War changed, not wounded. Changed, he'd stopped eating, stopped speaking. He would stand in the fields at night, perfectly still, for hours. Animals wouldn't go near him. The family dog tore its own leg open, trying to escape a room he'd walked into. And then the children started disappearing. Not Fields' children. The family made that very clear in the journal. It was other people's children, from neighboring farms, from the town. 3 in the span of 2 months. All under the age of 10. All last seen near the Fields' property. When the sheriff came, Ezekiel was gone. They found him a week later, living in the woods like an animal, covered in filth and mumbling in a language no one recognized. The family brought him back, and according to the journal, they did what they thought they had to do. They held him down in the barn. They broke his legs so he couldn't run. They bound his arms so he couldn't fight. And then, while he was still alive, they put him in the ground. The journal's final entry, written by Ezekiel's younger brother in 1867, read, "We did not kill him. We could not. He would not die. So we buried him where he could do no more harm. Let no man disturb this grave. Let no man speak his name. He belongs to the earth now, and the earth can keep him." Robert Fields read those words by flashlight, standing over the open grave of his great-grandfather, and realized his mother had sent him here to finish what they'd started over a century ago. But it was already too late. They'd opened it, and something, whether it was memory or curse, or just the weight of inherited guilt, had been let loose. Within 6 months, Michael Fields was dead. He'd driven his truck into a tree at 70 miles an hour on a straight, empty road in broad daylight. No skid marks, no signs of braking. The coroner ruled it an accident, but the people who saw the body said his face looked wrong. Not injured, just wrong. Like he'd seen something in the seconds before impact that had rewritten his expression into something that didn't belong on a human face. Robert lasted a little longer. He tried to rebury the grave, tried to put it all back the way it was, but he couldn't sleep anymore. He told his wife he could hear something moving in the walls of their house at night, scratching, breathing, waiting. In March of 1989, he locked himself in his garage, turned on his truck, and let the carbon monoxide take him. He left a note, just one line. "Some things should stay buried. We were warned." Clayton, the oldest, the one who'd known what they'd find before they even dug, lived the longest. But he never stopped talking about it. He'd show the photograph to anyone who'd listen. He'd recite passages from the journal. He'd insist that Ezekiel Fields hadn't been a man when they buried him, that something had gotten inside him during the war, something that didn't die when the body did. In 1993, Clayton Fields vanished. His truck was found parked at the edge of the old property, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition, no sign of struggle, no footprints. He was 77 years old. They never found him. Some people think he walked into the woods and didn't come back. Others think he went back to that grave and finally gave it what it wanted. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The property still exists. It's been abandoned since the early 90s. No one in the Fields family will go near it. The few distant relatives who still live in Harlan County won't even say the name out loud. In 2003, a developer tried to buy the land and turn it into a housing subdivision. The sale fell through after the surveying team refused to go back. They wouldn't explain why. They just said the woods felt wrong. That there were places on the property where their equipment wouldn't work, where compasses spun, where the air felt heavier than it should. In 2011, a group of amateur ghost hunters got permission to explore the site. They made it as far as the cemetery before their cameras all died at once. They left everything behind and never came back for it. One of them later said they'd heard something walking through the brush around them. Something that moved on two legs but didn't walk like a person. It circled them for 20 minutes, just outside the tree line, and then stopped. They said the silence after it stopped was worse than the sound of it moving. The grave itself has been disturbed multiple times over the years. Vandals, curiosity seekers, people who heard the story and didn't believe it. But no one's ever taken anything from it. And everyone who's opened it has said the same thing. That the body, or what's left of it, doesn't look like it's been in the ground for over 150 years. That the bones are too clean, too white. That the iron nails are still shiny, like they were driven in yesterday. And that if you stay there long enough, if you're quiet and you listen, you can hear something moving beneath the dirt. Not wind, not roots. Something deliberate, something waiting. The town doesn't talk about it anymore. The older folks know, but they've learned that some stories don't get better with the telling. They just spread. And the last thing Harlan County needs is more people showing up, looking for proof, digging where they shouldn't. Because the Fields family learned the hard way that some things aren't buried because they're dead. They're buried because they won't stay dead. And once you've seen it, once you've touched it, once you've let it know you're there, it doesn't forget. It just waits, and it has nothing but time.